Hello and welcome to Daniel and Revelation Prophetic Bible Study. So we are on session 3. We completed the general introduction of this book, the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation. So we are going to actually now study the books after completing the general introduction to these prophetic books. And today we are going to start with Daniel chapter 1, verse 1. So Daniel chapter 1. And here you see the Babylon depicted with the Ishtar gate, and the procession wall is filled with these kinds of lions on these walls, and Orocus. And here is the Ishtar gate that was resurrected or now depicted in the museum in Berlin. So archaeologists found this wall, and a German archaeologist found this, and now the parts of that was reconstructed and moved to the museums. So let's start with the structure of the book of Daniel. So here is the introduction to this book, and we will come across the characters Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So in verse 8, Daniel says Daniel was purposed in his heart not to defile himself with the pagan food. So we are going to study all that. What is the key? What is the significance of that? So this book is a bilingual book, meaning it is written in two languages. So as you can see, it is written in Hebrew. Daniel, being a Jew, he started writing this book in Hebrew. But when it comes to certain portions of the times of the Gentiles or the discussions that happened among them, so he actually, instead of translating what happened in Aramaic to Hebrew, he actually wrote that in Aramaic. In fact, we are going to see a chapter that was written by even Nebuchadnezzar, a proclamation about what happened to him. So when we get there, we'll study that. And then once we get to chapter 8, Daniel switches back to Hebrew, because this portion deals with, again, mostly with the Jews. So wherever it is considering the Jews, so he is using a Hebrew, and wherever it is using the Gentiles, so he is using an Aramaic language. So chapter 2, verse 4, starting there to chapter 7, verse 28, it is written in Aramaic. I'll show you the words exactly where it breaks off. In chapter 2, verse 4, in the middle of the verse, it switches from Hebrew to Aramaic. So it starts with, then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic. You can see why it is switching to Aramaic, because here he clearly says they spoke to the king in Aramaic, and now he is writing it in Aramaic. So in Daniel chapter 2, verse 4, that's where it switches to the Aramaic. So the layout of this book, chapters 1 to 6, deals with the history, narrative. So it also contains Nebuchadnezzar's dreams. But once you get to chapter 7 to 12, it is all about the prophecies and the visions that Daniel had. So he is going to write those prophecies and visions. So it's kind of a layout: chapters 1 to 6 history, and chapters 7 to 12 prophecy. But I just want to remind you at this time that these are not in chronological order. The book was not written in a chronological order. For example, chapter 7 would fall, chapter 7, the visions would fall after around chapter 5. So it is not in a chronological order, but these are separated by the history, the first 6 chapters, and then chapter 7 to 12 are the prophecies and visions. So let's get to the Daniel chapter 1, verse 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. So this verse is fully loaded. So once, if you are new to the Bible, or if you are studying the book of Daniel or the Old Testament for the first time, you need a lot of explanation, or even the Bible, those who study the Bible, they need some explanation. So what I decided is to go back to give some background to these kings, the kings of Israel and Judah, and where we got here. So who is Jehoiakim? And so we'll get to that point. So that is what we are going to study. Daniel chapter 1 verse 1. Let me read one more time. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. So if you look at this map, so here is a map showing the Babylonian Empire. So you look at, I'm going to highlight on few points. So look at Egypt and look at Judah, and then you look at the Babylonian Empire, and then look at the Elam and Ulai River. So once we get into the middle of the book, then we will come across those names also. The Susa, the palace where Queen Esther was. So we'll get to that. So I'm going to highlight some of those places again. So here I want to show you an artifact. So these are clay prisms. Sometimes they use this clay to make prisms or cylinders or tablets. And what these kings they do is they write all this their campaigns or the victories on these prisms to preserve the record. And fortunately, these were excavated, and now they are in the museums. So you can find Cyrus cylinder in the British Museum and things like that. And here is the one from Assyria. Assyrian terracotta prism describing the campaigns of Sennacherib, king of Assyria. Sennacherib, king of Assyria, was a prominent king, and especially after his reign, the Assyrian Empire slowly dissolved, or came to a diminished stage. So this prism describes the capture of Lachish and the siege of Jerusalem in 701 BC, and these were written in Isaiah 36 and 37. So when I look at these artifacts, that tells me, or at least, so the Bible is not a fictitious book. Bible is full of stories that were authenticated even with the history and archaeology. So I will be showing some of these things as we go along. So in the Assyrian demise, since the days of Sennacherib, 701 BC, Assyrian power and influence had waned. As I just mentioned, he was one of the prominent king, and after his siege, so during the king Hezekiah, after all that, so the Assyrian, the power influence started slowly going down. So the nation of Babylon, under the leadership of King Nabopolassar, had crashed the gates of Nineveh. King Nabopolassar is the father of Nebuchadnezzar. So when started this siege, Nebuchadnezzar was a general. I'm going to explain what happened during the time. So King Nabopolassar had crashed the gates of Nineveh, taking the Assyrian capital in 612 BC. So Nineveh, many of you can remember where the prophet Jonah was sent to preach the message of the word of God. So that is the Nineveh, and it was taken by Babylonians and Medes, so taken by them. And what happened was the Assyrian people was pushed towards west to Carchemish. By 609 BC, they were in Carchemish, eager to counterattack, but in desperate need of Egyptian reinforcements. So the Assyrian people were pushed to Carchemish. So let me bring the map again. So here you see the Babylon. So the Babylonian people were occupying the Nabopolassar occupied already Nineveh, and now those people, Assyrian people, were pushed to Carchemish. So now they want to revolt, but they needed additional reinforcements, and they are asking for help from Egypt. You look at the bottom left side, so there's the Egypt. and they're asking for the help from Egypt. And during the time it was Pharaoh Necho, the king. So he wanted to go and help with this battle of Carchemish. So, but when he started going that direction, the king of Judah, he came out and stopped or even attacked the king of Egypt. And this guy said, "Hey, what are you doing? I'm not even coming at you. And why are you fighting with me?" But still, the king of Judah did not listen. The king was Josiah at the time. So King Josiah went to battle with Egypt, although he was not, Egypt was not war with him, and he got killed. So you see this map here. So the Babylonian is going to Carchemish, and Pharaoh Necho from Egypt going to towards Carchemish, but he was stopped by Josiah, and they had to. He has the Necho has to fight a battle at Megiddo, and there he was killed. So here I want to give you a brief history of the kings of Israel. Unlike many other nations, Israel had no king before King Saul. So they had judges to rule over them. And when the people started asking for a king, and Samuel the prophet gave anointed King Saul. So Saul's the first king of Israel. And then you see the second king of Israel is King David. So King Saul and his son Jonathan, they were killed in a battle, and King David took on reigns, and he was anointed even before by his prophet Samuel. So King David is the second king of Israel. But when he wanted to build the temple, God asked him not to build it, but that his son would build it. And now you see King Solomon is the third king of Israel. And Solomon built the temple, the first temple for the Jewish nation. So when you look at this map and you can see the United Kingdom, so the reason is very important. I need to stress this because when you are talking about King David and Solomon, so you have a united kingdom. So the Israel, Judah, and all the tribes, all the 12 tribes are all there in the United Kingdom. But when after Solomon, there was a civil war, and then Jeroboam and Rehoboam, they had the civil war, and then the nations were, as you can see in this map. So now you have the kingdom of Israel, that is Jeroboam on the northern kingdom, usually called the northern kingdom. And then you have the southern kingdom, the king, the Rehoboam, that son of Solomon. So here you have the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom. So and after this, after Solomon, you always have this division. So they have always these two, southern kingdom and the northern kingdom, kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel. But I just want to make a point here. Sometimes when we talk about the people of Israel and Israel as a nation in general, sometimes it includes both the kingdom of Judah and also the kingdom of Israel. So the reason behind that is, as you have seen, the United Kingdom, it was called Israel. And although it was now a divided kingdom, kingdom of Judah and kingdom of Israel, but sometimes it is Israel is generally referred to the whole united kingdom, although they are not united. So just want to keep that in mind. I don't want to bore you with all the list of the kings, but I just want to give you an idea here. So as you can see at the top in the blue, there you have Saul and David and Solomon, because they are represented the United Kingdom. And then the split came, then the Rehoboam, the son of Solomon. And on the other side, you see the northern kingdom, Jeroboam, starting there. So this is these are all the kings, and I want you to pay attention to the bottom right side. So where you see Josiah, so Josiah is the one who went to battle with Egypt unnecessarily, if I may say, and then he lost his life at the age of 39, and his sons Jehoiakim, Jehoiahaz, and Zedekiah, they became kings. in a very limited span during the time of King Nebuchadnezzar. Mostly these are the after Josiah, those kings are all vassal kings. They were just puppet kings installed by either Egypt at the beginning and then by Nebuchadnezzar. After that, I'm going to explain at what point that happened. So I also created a spreadsheet with all these names of the kings of Judah, although I included Saul and David, but then mainly I included the line after Rehoboam. So, and the number of years they reigned. So, interestingly, Saul 40 years, David 40 years, and Solomon 40 years. And after that, you see their 17, 3 years, and things like that. There are Jehoiahaz reigned only for 3 months, and so you will come up, and also Jeconiah also 3 months because they were removed from their puppet state and taken as a captive and installed the other puppet kings. So we're going to see that, but this list will help you to figure out who is the where. So the couple of kings I'm going to mention during this presentation is one Hezekiah. Hezekiah was a good king, but he entertained the Babylonian delegation and showed all his riches. Immediately after he got healed, there was this Babylonian delegation that was came to visit him. Instead of praising how God healed him, he was kind of taken by this delegation to show off all his riches and all his gold and silver and all that. And prophet Isaiah has to warn him and told him, so whatever you are showing to Babylon, one day it will all be taken to Babylon. And that happened, and that was fulfilled, especially with the last king Zedekiah. So, and then the king Manasseh, he is one of the worst kings, although he reigned for 55 years. So one of the kings that did a lot of evil. So, and then comes to Josiah. Josiah was 8 years old when he was installed as king, and he reigned for 31 years, and that's what I mentioned. So he died at 39 unnecessarily, fighting a war with the king of Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt. So we are going to see more details coming there. So here is what happened with Josiah. Josiah was mortally wounded at Megiddo, as I showed you. You can read the story in 2 Kings chapter 23 and also in 2 Chronicles 35. So Pharaoh Necho, that is the king of Egypt, on his way to war with Babylon at Carchemish. I showed you the map at the top. So because the Assyrians wanted some help from Egypt, Pharaoh Necho, on his way to war with Babylon there at Carchemish to help with the Assyrians, he warned Josiah not to interfere, but Josiah did not listen to him. So he went to fight at Megiddo, and he was mortally wounded. So that is about Josiah. So when Josiah was mortally wounded, he was immediately taken back to Jerusalem, and there he died. And the Judahites, the people there, installed Jehoiahaz as a king. He reigned for 3 months. The reason for that is, although he was installed by the people, Jehoiahaz was made a king, but then Josiah was mortally wounded by King Pharaoh Necho. So now Pharaoh Necho has an upper hand on Judah. So now he comes here and says he removes Jehoiahaz and installed Eliakim as a puppet king, because now he has the upper hand because he killed Josiah. So he installed Eliakim, and one way they do that is, they installed and put him as charge, and he has to pay tributes and all that. But not only that, he also changed his name. So he changed his name to Jehoiakim. So this Eliakim is now Jehoiakim. That's why whenever you see Jehoiakim, and sometimes he is also called as Eliakim. So his name was changed to Jehoiakim by Pharaoh Necho. And now Egypt supported Assyria to fight against Babylon, and Babylon actually conquered at Carchemish. So here the Babylonian Empire was now dominating pretty much Assyria, and now Egypt, because of indirect Egypt was helping at the top with at Carchemish. So let me explain this here. So Babylon now went to Carchemish to fight battles there against Assyria, but then Egypt also joined hands to help them. So now when Babylonian won the battle at Carchemish in 609, so pretty much this whole region is now dominated by Babylon, and that is the starting point, if you will, for the Babylonian Empire. So Babylonian Empire now has the Assyria under control, because of the battle at Carchemish, and then because Egypt was trying to help, and Egypt also lost. Now they have upper hand with Egypt also, and Egypt already has defeated Judah and installed a puppet king. Now Judah is also comes under Babylon. So now this pretty whole region is now under the control of Babylon. So, but the king installed the Egypt king, Pharaoh Necho installed a puppet king in Judah. Now, when Babylon king Nebuchadnezzar came there, he told him to that this, because he is a vassal king. Now he is asked to be a vassal for him instead of for Egypt. Now because he dominated Egypt as well. So that Babylonian text mentioning Nebuchadnezzar's victory at Carchemish and his later capture of Jerusalem in 589 BC, all that history was written on these tablets. So these are the artifacts I talked about. So you can find some of them in the museums now. So Jehoiakim, son of King Josiah. So here is what happened. When Josiah died at Megiddo, his younger son Jehoiahaz was chosen king by the Judahites. But the Egyptian conqueror Pharaoh Necho took Jehoiahaz to Egypt and made Jehoiakim as king. So you see, the choice of the people were denied, and he was taken as a captive, and he was taken to Egypt. But and Pharaoh Necho installed Jehoiakim as king. He actually named him as Jehoiakim, although his name was Eliakim. Jehoiakim reigned under the protection of Pharaoh Necho for some time and paid tribute until Babylon took over, and Babylon asked him to be their vassal king. So when the Chaldean is also the other name that's used for Babylon, those regions, Shinar and Chaldean, Babylon, so all those refers to the same geolocation. Sometimes they may be calling the local districts or the counties or the nation itself. So anyway, so here the new Chaldean Empire or the Babylonian Empire under Nebuchadnezzar defeated Egypt at the Battle of Carchemish. I just showed you the map. However, Jehoiakim changed his allegiance from the Egyptian king to Nebuchadnezzar. So before that, before Nebuchadnezzar's victory over Carchemish, so this guy was supporting Egyptian king, and now he is supporting Nebuchadnezzar, actually became a vassal. He remained loyal for 3 years and then revolted against Nebuchadnezzar. So that's what it happened. So I'm going to give you a brief summary here. Just by reading 2 Chronicles 36, this gives the complete account of all those kings, and that will be the very good background for to study the book of Daniel. So then the people of the land took Jehoiahaz, the son of Josiah, and made him king in his father's place in Jerusalem. So as I just said, the Josiah was killed in the battle at Megiddo, an unnecessary battle, if I may add. He got killed at the age of 39, and then the people took Jehoiahaz, his younger son, and made him king. And Jehoiahaz was 23 years old when he became king, and he reigned 3 months in Jerusalem. And Pharaoh Necho came and deposed him. Now the king of Egypt, that's Pharaoh Necho, deposed him at Jerusalem, and he imposed on the land a tribute of 100 talents of silver and a talent of gold. And then the king of Egypt made Jehoiahaz's brother Eliakim king over Judah and Jerusalem, and changed his name to Jehoiakim. And Necho took Jehoahaz, his brother, and carried him off to Egypt. So and now we never heard of him, what happened to him. So his brother, the people anointed as Jehoiahaz as king, but Pharaoh Necho took him to Egypt and installed Jehoiakim. And now in verse 5, Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord. So one of the themes I'm going to show you later about all these kings is a common theme, that is, they did evil in the sight of the Lord. So in verse 6, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up against him. Now the Egyptian king installed this Jehoiakim and took his brother to Egypt, and now comes Nebuchadnezzar to the same place here. And around that time, his father Nabopolassar died. So what he did was he just picked up a few nobility people of royal line like Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and a few others. He did not destroy the city. He did not do any damage to the city or did anything. He asked Jehoiakim to be his vassal. So he just switched religions. Instead of being a puppet king for Egypt, now he is a puppet king for Babylon. So Jehoiakim reigned there for 11 years in Jerusalem. So I just want to remind, most of the time we think that at the first deportation there was a lot of fighting and damage or things like that, but nothing happened during that time because Nebuchadnezzar's father died and he has to go back and claim the throne. So he didn't do anything except to install Jehoiakim as his vassal. So that's what it happened. So in verse 6, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up against him and bound him in bronze fetters to carry him off to Babylon. This is when, after the 11 years, Jehoiakim, instead of being a vassal to Nebuchadnezzar, he rebelled against him. He listened to the false prophets. So the true prophets like Jeremiah, Ezekiel, they warned him, told him not to rebel, and told him that God is using Nebuchadnezzar as his instrument to punish the Judah. But they rebelled, and when Jehoiakim rebelled, here you see Nebuchadnezzar came, king of Babylon, came up against him. That is when this is the second deportation, and bound him in bronze fetters to carry him off to Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar also carried off some of the articles from the house of the Lord to Babylon and put them in his temple at Babylon. You notice this is the second deportation. Ezekiel was also in the second deportation. Still, the temple was not destroyed, the city was not destroyed, because this king Jehoiakim rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar. What he did was he just took him off, carry him on fetters to Babylon, but installed another king in his place. Now the rest of the acts of Jehoiakim, the abominations which he did, and what was found against him, indeed they are written in the book of the kings of Israel. So you can read that in 1 Kings, 2 Kings, and that is what it's talking about here. Then Jehoiachin, his son, reigned in his place. So when he was taken, so Jehoiachin was reigned in his place. But again, Jehoiachin was 18 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 3 months and 10 days, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord. So at the turn of the year, so he was there for only 3 months and 10 days, and the king Nebuchadnezzar summoned him and took him to Babylon, and with costly articles from the house of the Lord, and made Zedekiah, Jehoiakim's brother, king over Judah and Jerusalem. So now, this after 3 months of reign, he was also summoned to come back to Babylon, and then King Nebuchadnezzar installed Zedekiah, Jehoiakim's brother, king over Judah and Jerusalem. So verse 11, Zedekiah, he is the last king of Israel here. So you can see Zedekiah was 21 years old when he became king, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. He did evil in the sight of the Lord his God, and did not humble himself before Jeremiah the prophet, who spoke from the mouth of the Lord. See, the previous king, the Jehoiakim, rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar, and that's why he was removed, and he was in fact taken captive, and Zedekiah was installed. And Jeremiah the prophet was told them not to fight against Nebuchadnezzar, but then Zedekiah did not listen. After he reigned for 11 years, he rebelled, and he rebelled against King Nebuchadnezzar. By this time, this is the third time Nebuchadnezzar had full of this. He don't want to deal with this anymore. So every time he comes and installs a king, and then he asks them to be his vassal king there. But again, Zedekiah rebelled. In fact, as you can see, also he rebelled against King Nebuchadnezzar, who had made him swear an oath by God. Probably Nebuchadnezzar thought, so these guys worship the God of Israel, and maybe if he takes an oath by the God, and he will not fight against me. But Nebuchadnezzar was wrong. So that's why Zedekiah was stiffened his neck and hardened his heart against turning to the Lord God of Israel. So he rebelled. He did not listen to the prophet. He did not want to be a vassal king of the Nebuchadnezzar. So this is all the reason now King Nebuchadnezzar came back to destroy everything. So the temple, the city, and took also Zedekiah with him. And I'm going to see what happened to him. 2 Chronicles 36:14. Moreover, all the leaders of the priests and the people transgressed more and more. Even in the midst of all these calamities, the evil is going more and more. The people transgressed more and more, according to all the abominations of the nations, and defiled the house of the Lord, which he had consecrated in Jerusalem. So here is a summary of the fall of Jerusalem. Sometimes people may think, why God allowed Nebuchadnezzar to ruin or destroy the Judah. So here is the fall of the summary. So you can read this summary here in the 15th verse. And the Lord God of their fathers sent warnings to them by his messengers, rising up early and sending them, because he had compassion on his people and on his dwelling place. I want you to pay attention to this word. God had compassion on his people and on his dwelling place. But the people, what did they do? But they mocked the messengers of God, despised his words, and scoffed at his prophets, until the wrath of the Lord arose against his people, till there was no remedy. So when there was no remedy, now you see that's the main reason why King Nebuchadnezzar has to come as an instrument to punish the people here. So to begin with, I don't want you to miss the point. God had compassion on his people and on his dwelling place. Prophet after prophet, he was sending prophets to the people to warn them. But the response was, and they scoffed at these prophets until the wrath of the Lord arose against his people, till there was no remedy. I kind of alluded to this the reason in the session 2. So maybe you can watch session 2 if you have not already watched the session 2. So that is one of the reasons why Nebuchadnezzar had to subdue Judah. So the fall of Jerusalem, verse 17, therefore he brought against them the king of Chaldeans. So I again mentioned earlier, the king of Chaldeans or the king of Babylon or all refers to the same thing, same person, the king Nebuchadnezzar, who killed their young men with their sword in the house of their sanctuary, and had no compassion on young man or virgin, on the aged or the weak. He gave them all into his hand. So, especially after Zedekiah, the last king, rebelled against King Nebuchadnezzar, he had enough with these people, and there you see what happened. So, verse 18, and all the articles from the house of God, great and small, the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king and of his leaders, all this he took to Babylon. So that's how all these utensils, all the treasures, all the goblets, the golden goblets, everything taken to Babylon. Then they burned the house of God, broke down the wall of Jerusalem, burnt all its palaces with fire, and destroyed all its precious possessions. See, when Nebuchadnezzar first installed Jehoiakim as a vassal, he did not destroy anything. And when he rebelled, when he installed the Jehoiachin, the other king, he did not install, or Zedekiah, he did not do anything. So, but when Zedekiah, the last king, rebelled, so that is when you see, then they burned the house of God, broke down the wall of Jerusalem, burned all its palaces with fire, and destroyed all its precious possessions. So that is how it happened with the fall of Jerusalem. And verse 20, and those who escaped from the sword he carried away to Babylon, where they became servants to him and his sons, until the rule of the kingdom of Persia. So you see, they knew for 70 years they were in the Babylonian exile, until the Persian Empire, when the Cyrus, the king and the Persian ruler came. So he freed the exiles to go back to Jerusalem. And you see, now you see the reason. 21, to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land had enjoyed her Sabbaths. As long as she lay desolate, she kept Sabbath to fulfill 70 years. So let me just explain this verse. What happened, for one of the reasons that they have to be in Babylon for 70 years is God asked them to follow the Sabbath. That means you work for 6 days, and on the seventh day it is set aside for God to be holy. That is the Sabbath day. And same way, for 6 years, the people are supposed to work, and on the seventh year they have to take a sabbatical year, not to work on the seventh year. For 490 years, they did not obey the God's commands. So God said, I am going to take those 70 years that you did not give to me for the 490 years. So for 490 years, every seventh year, so that comes to 70 years, now they are exiled to Babylon, and the land enjoyed its Sabbath. So that's what, let me read it again. Verse 21, to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land had enjoyed her Sabbath. So you see, as long as she lay desolate, she kept Sabbath to fulfill 70 years. So that is the reason why they were there for 70 years in Babylon, because they did not obey the Lord to follow the sabbatical years. And now I want to just take you on a drive to show you all these kings and what was told about them. Of course, I am not going to look at every king. I'm just picking on a few, including some kings of Israel and some from Judah. So some from the northern northern kingdom, and some from the southern kingdom, the Judah. So here is a northern king, son Nadab. Now Nadab, the son of Jeroboam, became king over Israel in the second year of Asa, king of Judah, and he reigned over Israel 2 years. So Nadab, talking about Nadab, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord, and walked in the way of his father, and in his sin by which he had made Israel sin. So the constant thread, as you can see in all the theme for all these kings, many of them they did evil in the sight of the Lord. And Ahaziah, the son of Ahab, became king over Israel in Samaria in the 17th year of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, and reigned 2 years over Israel. And now again that comes the same point, 52. He did evil in the sight of the Lord. For what is the evil also mentioned here in verse 53? For he served Baal and worshipped him and provoked the Lord God of Israel to anger. So God has clearly told them with his 10 commandments not to make any graven images, not to worship any idols, because he is a jealous God, he is a holy God, and they are supposed to be worshiping Yahweh, the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Israel. But what did the kings do? They started worshipping Baal and started worshipping other gods, and that provoked the Lord to anger. So that's what we see here. So let me read it again. Verse 52. He did evil in the sight of the Lord, for he served Baal and worshipped him, and provoked the Lord God of Israel to anger. And now you see about another king. Thus King Rehoboam strengthened himself in Jerusalem and reigned, and he did evil because he did not prepare his heart to seek the Lord. So one of the things that were asked of Israel is to follow the Lord with all their heart, wholeheartedly. So here, this king, you see, he did evil and he did not prepare his heart to seek the Lord. And we look at another king, Manasseh, was 12 years old when he became king, and he reigned 55 years in Jerusalem. He is the king who reigned for the longest time, 55 years there. Manasseh was 12 years and he reigned 55 years, but he did evil in the sight of the Lord. See, that same thread of that doing evil continued, according to the abominations of the nations whom the Lord has cast out before the children of Israel. And let's see what he did. Verse 6, and he, that is Manasseh, caused his sons to pass through the fire in the valley of the son of Hinnom. He practiced soothsaying, used witchcraft and sorcery, and consulted mediums and spiritists. He did much evil in the sight of the Lord to provoke him to anger. So he caused his sons to pass through the fire. So it is like they are offering even their children as a sacrifice. And here you see, even he is making them walk on the fire, some kind of a practice, wicked practice, that they were following the practices of the other heathen nations. And also it is clearly prohibited in the Bible not to do this soothsaying, witchcraft, sorcery, consulting evil spirits, mediums, spiritists, and all that. And this guy, this King Manasseh, did all that, and he did much evil in the sight of the Lord to provoke him to anger. So we as Christians also have to be very careful not to follow the things, not to go to the palm readers, psyches, and all kinds of people, those who deal with the evil spirits. So you have to stay away from all that. So we are clearly asked not to get into all that kind of wickedness. In here we see another king. Ahaziah reigns in Judah, also walked in the ways of the house of Ahab, for his mother advised him to do wickedly. This is kind of an interesting thing I've seen here. Usually mothers tell the kids to follow and be good, but here his mother advised him to do wickedly. And verse 4, therefore he did evil in the sight of the Lord, like the house of Ahab, for they were in his counselors after the death of his father to his destruction. So the thread continues, the theme continues. They did evil in the sight of the Lord. They did evil in the sight of the Lord. And now we finally comes to, I skipped several other kings in between, but now I just want to make a point that this is kind of a progression until we get to the point where God said enough is enough, and then we see the destruction of the city and the temple. And now we come to the last three kings. That's where the Nebuchadnezzar was dealing with. The first king he dealt with was Jehoiakim. He's the vassal king removed from Egypt, and now he is a vassal to the Babylonian Empire. So Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord his God. You see that continues. So Jehoiakim was also very evil in the sight of God. And Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up against him and bound him in bronze fetters to carry him off to Babylon. So he reigned 11 years, and at the end of the 11 years, what did he do? He rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar, and Nebuchadnezzar came up against him, bound him, and took him out to Babylon. And then you see about Jehoiachin. He was 18 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 3 months and 10 days, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord. And at the turn of the year, King Nebuchadnezzar summoned him and took him to Babylon, and he installed Zedekiah. We heard about him earlier. So Zedekiah was 21 years old when he became king, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. He did evil in the sight of the Lord his God, and he did not humble himself before Jeremiah the prophet, who spoke from the mouth of the Lord. Here is the Jeremiah the prophet telling Zedekiah not to rebel against the king Nebuchadnezzar. And what did Zedekiah do? He listened to all the false prophets. He actually put Jeremiah in prison. He listened to the false prophets, and these false prophets kind of put him on an ego to fight against Nebuchadnezzar. It is always a dangerous thing to listen to the evil prophets or the false prophets. This applies to Christians for us. We should also be very careful to whom we are listening to. So it is always we need to be very careful to listening to the word of God. So if we if we just keep hearing to the false preachers, false teachers, so we will be also getting into trouble like Zedekiah. That is what my point is. In fact, I want to bring it to your attention. When Paul the apostle, he went and preached the gospel, he even preached in Berea, and there the people were called noble because they went and searched the scriptures to see if Paul was teaching it correct or not. So the point I'm making is, whenever you hear to a teacher, even me, so it doesn't matter. So you need to check the scriptures, whether the teacher is teaching according to the scriptures or not. There are teachers these days, especially the prosperity gospel, that's spreading like anything. So what they promise is with greed. So if you have $100, so what they say is that you give that $100 to them, and God will multiply you 1,000 times. So these people who are filled with greed, they think that, okay, instead of putting this in a bank and get a few cents as an interest back, so why not I give it to this preacher who is promising 1,000-fold or whatever it may be. So it is all built on greed. It is not with the heart to give it to God or anything like that. So you need to be very careful, especially dealing with the false preachers and false teachers. And there are, of course, cults. They stray away from the word of God. And that's why please listen to my session 1 and session 2, where I explained about these cults in my previous sessions. So now coming back to Zedekiah was 21 years old when he became king, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. He did evil in the sight of the Lord his God, and he did not humble himself before Jeremiah the prophet. So verse 13, and he also rebelled against King Nebuchadnezzar, who had made him swear an oath by God, but he stiffened his neck and hardened his heart against turning to the Lord. So this time Nebuchadnezzar was not happy. He kind of installed Jehoiakim and Jehoiachin and then Zedekiah, and now this guy rebelled, and now this is the last straw for him. He comes back and destroys everything, city, temple, and took everyone captive. So here is the 3 deportations, as you can see in a tabular form. First deportation. So that time his father died, Nabopolassar, so he did not do anything. He just installed Jehoiakim as a vassal king. This Jehoiakim was already a vassal to Egypt, and now Babylon, because of Babylonian domination, so Jehoiakim now became vassal to Nebuchadnezzar. So that time there was not much damage. There are only few people were taken, like Daniel and friends and some royal people, Judean nobility. So that is what happened in 605, around 605 BC. But when Jehoiakim rebelled, so he was taken captive. That's in the second deportation. There were some 10,000 people taken to Babylon. Some mighty men, some people were with very skills. All those people were taken to Babylon. Prophet Ezekiel was on the second group, second deportation in the reign of Jehoiachin. And then, of course, Nebuchadnezzar summoned him to come back and installed Zedekiah. So finally, when Zedekiah rebelled at 586, the third deportation, that's when the temple, city, everything was destroyed. So after 11 years of Zedekiah's reign. So then King Nebuchadnezzar's attacks on Judah. So then the king of Babylon killed the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes. I just want to give you a cross reference here. What I'm doing is giving you a cross reference. It is not just I'm reading from one book or one passage, but there are other prophets or other passages that you can see a similar description given. So I'm just trying to link all those additional details to this events that happened. So now we are reading from Jeremiah 39 verses 6 and 8. Then the king of Babylon killed the sons of Zedekiah. Zedekiah being the last king, he rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar. That is when the temple and the city were destroyed. So this is what happened to Zedekiah at the time because of his rebellion. So then the king of Babylon killed the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes in Riblah. The king of Babylon also killed all the nobles of Judah. Moreover, he put out Zedekiah's eyes and bound him with bronze fetters to carry him off to Babylon. And the Chaldeans burned the king's house and the houses of the people with fire and broke down the walls of Jerusalem. So Jeremiah also describes what happened to Zedekiah here. And there is yet another prophecy which is staggering. So Ezekiel gives a prophecy here about what is going to happen and that got exactly fulfilled. In verse 12, and the prince who is among them shall bear his belongings on his shoulder at twilight and go out. And here is the point. I will bring him to Babylon. Talking about Zedekiah, I will bring him to Babylon, right? That's what happened. He was taken to Babylon, to the land of the Chaldeans, that's the Babylon. Yet he shall not see it. He was taken to Babylon, but yet he shall not see it. So though he shall die there. So that is what we just read in Jeremiah, because his eyes were taken out after killing his sons. The last thing that he saw, that Zedekiah, was that his children were killed in front of him, and then his eyes were taken away. And here Ezekiel prophesies, I will bring him to Babylon, to the land of Chaldeans, yet he shall not see it, though he shall die there. So because he had no eyes when he was taken to Babylon, he was taken to Babylon without eyes, and he died there. That's what the point was. So I was just giving these cross references to make to connect these dots, that it is not just the Chronicles, or it is not just the Kings. There were other prophecies, like prophets like Jeremiah and Ezekiel were also fully writing about what the events that were going on and prophesying things. So now you know what happened and during the history of Israel and Judah and all the evil they did. So that is the reason why God allowed Nebuchadnezzar to go and destroy, or allowed to take over Judah. So now we completed Daniel chapter 1, verse 1 finally, with all that background. So now verse 2, and the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with some of the articles of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of God, and he brought the articles into the treasure house of his God. So, as I told you, this is the first deportation. This is when Nebuchadnezzar's father died, Nabopolassar. So Nebuchadnezzar did not do anything except to install Jehoiakim as a vassal king, and he took all this noble children like Daniel. He was around like 15 years at the time, and all other noble royal kids to Babylon. But Jehoiakim rebelled. So all this history I gave you until Zedekiah. So we do not read that in the book of Daniel. So once Daniel goes to Babylon, he is not going to write anything about what happened during his stay there. He is not going to address these 3 deportations. He is not going to write anything in the book of Daniel. So Daniel, in his first deportation, so he was taken there to the court of Babylon, and now from there we only look at his life and his interactions with Nebuchadnezzar and all the stories, but we are not going to see anything that happened to the city or the temple, except we get to chapter 9 where he was towards the end of the 70 years he was praying about it, asking God what is going to happen after 70 years. So once we get to that stage, I am going to explain. So we completed Daniel chapter 1, verse 1 successfully today. So I just want to let you know that from next week we will be diving into the rest of the chapter, and we will do it at a much faster pace because we have completed the background, and there is no additional background that is needed for the rest of the verses in this chapter 1 or the other chapters. So with that said, so next week we are going, God willing, we are going to complete Daniel chapter 1, and probably we may get into chapter 2 as well. I want to thank you for watching this video, and if you are watching this for the first time, and if you are not a subscriber, please do subscribe to my videos, and also please like and click on that bell icon to be notified of the new all the new videos. So here is the address, YouTube / Dr. John Reddy. And also I have a blog. I write articles on the questions that some of you ask me. So please check my blog at mydailydevotion.org. Thank you for watching. So see you next week.